opportunity to go to a birthday party last night. Someone got older. Nathan is well in his 30s now. It's an old man, We're in part 3 of a 4-part series called Staying in Love this morning, and I'm excited that many of you are taking what we've been talking about in scriptures and you've been really just taking a shot at it. And I've had some really good conversations with you. And one thing that I think some of you are discovering is that this marriage thing, this staying in love thing, it's difficult. And it's okay for it to be difficult. I mean, we really don't ever arrive. We continue to work at our marriages, right? And let me just remind you that we are usually attracted to people who are the opposite of us, right? So that is great for attraction, but not so great when you get to doing the day-to-day living, right? That becomes much more difficult. And why is it difficult? It's because we're different. We're different. We have different interests. We have different desires, different things going on. So the very thing that attracted us actually could be the very thing that we're struggling with now. And it just takes some work to remember that we should treasure each other, right? Remember that the one that we are in relationship with is worth treasuring. Like we've been saying, it takes a pulse to fall in love. It takes a plan to stay in love. And it usually involves, Jack, that 4-letter word, work, right? The question we've been asking, the Juno question, is it possible for two people to stay happy together forever? Is it possible to fall in love? Well, yes, that's for sure, right? But also to stay in love forever together? Well, the truth is, even if I told you no, it's not possible and tried to convince you of that, you tried it anyway. So the real question is, how does it happen? How do we get it to happen in our relationship? How do we stay forever in love? And we said that part of this is part of this making it a reality in our lives is learning to make love a verb. We looked at the words of Jesus the first week in John 13:34. He said, "A new command I give you, love one another." Not just fall into love noun, but verb love one another, right? Go do it. We also talked about mutual submission. Paul said in Ephesians 5:21, submit to one another. Bring yourself under one another out of reverence for Christ. You know, another bad word in our culture, right? Submit. So when we put this together, it looks like love actively verb one another, specifically submit. Now there's a change in perspective in love, in relationships, right? Definitely that S word is bad in our culture, right? We just don't like that word. Last week we talked more about learning to love like Christ loved us. Aren't you glad that we have such a great example of what love looks like? How would we even know what love looked like if we didn't know Jesus? We have such a huge advantage in the church, knowing Christ, knowing what love looks like as far as this conversation goes, right? We looked at Philippians chapter 2 where Paul describes Christ's love for us. He tells us that we should love as he loves, right? You remember the 3 ways that we mentioned? We talked a little bit about, this isn't a competition. We're not here to show the other person how smart we are, how much better we are than them. We really are trying to value them. When we compete, no one wins. There's just losers, right? Jesus modeled treating others like they are more important than us. Serving them, not competing with them, but working to be interested in the things that they're interested in. Really difficult stuff. And we talked about how Jesus had a dilemma. He had a dilemma that we have, right? Same dilemma, same choice. We can either get what we deserve, we can get our rights that we deserve, we can get the respect that we deserve, or we can stay in a loving relationship. We have an option, right? But we can't have it both ways. And it's tough stuff, but good stuff. isn't it? Have you been processing through this? I definitely have been processing through this, thinking, man, why did I just do that? Why didn't I think through that before I did it? Just thinking through things. And if you missed any of the conversation, we do have them on our website. And I just encourage you to take a look and be reminded of what we've been through. And now perhaps you've been sitting here and thinking, well, yeah, I think I'll try that. But maybe you're thinking, it's just not that simple. It's just not that simple. I mean, it sounds simple. Just go do it. But it's just not that simple. And I would agree with you. The truth is that it's just not that simple at all. And that's really what I want to talk about a little bit this morning. How our emotions start playing into this whole situation. The truth is that romantic relationships have a special ability to bring out our emotions in a way that normal relationships don't. That's just the fact of the matter. For good, for bad, for whatever, when we are in a romantic relationship, everything gets amplified, doesn't it? Think about this. If someone that I didn't know said something to me that I kind of took as kind of an attack, yeah, it's going to be troubling somewhat to me, but if Wendy were to say this exact same words, it would come across totally different, wouldn't it? It would hurt much more. The pain would be greater because I trust her. I mean, I put my confidence in her. She's my confidant. And you know what I'm talking about? I mean, if someone that you love, someone that's deeply, they know you so well, they speak something to you, it's deeper. It cuts deeper. It hurts or it helps deeper. Now think about how in the world that two people can stand at an altar and swear in their lives that they're going to love each other forever and ever and ever and ever till death do us part, and then 5 years later, 10 years later, they hate each other. And this isn't just a normal hate. This is a hate like they hate them more than any other person on the planet, right? How does that happen? But we see it all the time, and there are some who deserve it. I'd grant you that. But if you think about it, why wouldn't you reserve your greatest hate for maybe a serial killer or some dictator, some place that's doing harm to all these people? I mean, there are people out there that do horrible things to people, right? But when we think about our ex-husband or ex-wife or ex-whatever, I mean, it's just on a totally different scale. Isn't that just weird? How does this turn out so badly? And the truth is, we don't just snap and we're somehow unable to love, right? In fact, after the relationship is terminated, after you break up, you still have this idea that you might fall in love again, right? Something different. In fact, it's very likely that you'll fall in love, right? You have a pulse, still alive. But somehow this person has gotten so far under your skin that you just... How does this happen? Well, part of the reason is they know us deeply, right? They know us. So they know what causes pain. And I would encourage you, if that's the truth, that, if you want to stay in love, you probably shouldn't take advantage of that information, right? But the other part of this is what we were just talking about. That the people we love, their words matter. Their words matter more. What they do matters. They have special meaning to us. They touch us in a deeper way than others can, right? For better, for worse. And I have to admit that I'm pretty simple-minded about this. Knowing the fact that chances are when you leave this relationship, you're going to fall in love again, right? And so this couple that's sitting in front of me in my office is probably going to fall in love again, but I just want to have this conversation. I don't actually have this conversation. Maybe I should have this conversation, but I just see it going like this. So let me just get this straight. So both of you were in love with each other, right? but now you can't stand each other. But both of you are open to the possibility of falling in love with somebody else, starting a new relationship, right? I mean, at least at some point. Maybe not right this second, but somewhere in the future. We'll have an idea for you. Why don't you just fall in love with each other again? I mean, since you already have this life that you've put together, you built this life together, to break that apart, it's going to be complicated. It's going to be painful, difficult, expensive. Wouldn't it just be easier, cheaper, to fall in love, not with somebody else, but with the person you're already in the relationship with? Can you do that? And I already know what they would say to me. They would look at me and say, "You don't understand. It's just not that simple." And the truth is, I think I do understand, but it isn't that simple, is it? Because there's just so much more going on behind the scenes, down deep in our hearts. Maybe even more than what we'd even know about ourselves or them. And deep relationships, they bring out deep emotions, right? And that's great when things are going really well, but that's really hard when things aren't going so well. It gets bad. The words of our most loved ones can cut us to the core faster than anyone else in our lives. The damage has already been done, right? And that's a big piece of the puzzle here. The damage has already been done, not just in that relationship, but even before that relationship. We don't come into relationships with a clean slate, right? We've talked about this quite a bit, our brokenness. We all bring what we call baggage into relationships. Relational hurts from the past, different things that we've run into that's hurt us. And our relationships, wouldn't they be so much simpler if we didn't have that to deal with? Wouldn't they just be so much easier to deal with if we were somehow emotionally healthy and we didn't have emotional issues, no bitterness, no anger, no oversensitivity to situations, no memories? But we don't. Couples don't normally come into romantic relationships with no past, right? In fact, as Christians, we believe that part of our brokenness that we're dealing with is the brokenness that we enter life with, that we are separated from God. And that time before Christ, our coping mechanisms, our walls that we put up, our insecurities, they affect our lives, our relationships. And much of this, we don't even know is there until we start digging a little bit deeper, which is what deep relationships do more than any other relationship. You see where I'm going here? Put these two thoughts together. Deep relationships have a special ability to bring out our emotions, and we all bring baggage into our relationships with things left deeply covered, right? Deep insecurities. And what do we get? Well, we get an accident waiting to happen is what we get, right? There's bound to be a problem somewhere along the way, right? So let me just kind of illustrate this for you, other than this picture. Let me just introduce to you a couple, and I think this will help us have this conversation. So if you'll show the video.
Now I want to try to illustrate for you exactly what that looks like, and to do that I have a couple of friends here. This is Mr. and Mrs. Mugg, okay? So say, "Hey, this is Mr. Mugg," and "Hey, this is Mrs. Mugg." Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Mugg. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Mugg met right after college, and like many people, when they, he saw her and said, I got, and she's like, woo, and he had a degree and a future, and she was, look at her. I mean, she's a knockout, so that's working for her. And so they started dating, and when they first started dating and hanging out, they were so careful. Because he's trying to win her heart, and she's trying to win his affection, and they were just so careful. And they had a few little problems along the way, and there were a couple of bumps in the relationship, but they were just so careful, and everything was going to be great. And then they got married. And then about a month into their marriage, they had a problem, they had a bump. And stuff came out. And he looked at her and said, "Whoa, where did all that come from?" And she looked at him and said, "Well, I didn't know you had anger issues." And he said, "Well, I didn't have anger issues till you bumped me." Oh, there it is again. And then they had another problem, and they just were so, and she went to see her sister, and she said, "I didn't know he was like that." And he went to see, you know, we don't know where guys go. They don't go anywhere, you know. He looked in the mirror, perhaps, I don't know. And he sat around thinking, wow, she makes me so mad. She makes me so mad. Whenever she brings that up, I just get mad. And if she would quit bumping me like that, then I wouldn't be so mad. My wife, you know, she has issues. And so he says to her, he says, you know, when we were dating, I didn't see all this. Where's all that coming from? She says, well, every time we get in an argument, you make me act that way. Now, it's been entertaining so far, even if you haven't learned anything, right? Now, here's what I want you to see. Mr. Mugg thinks the reason the blue beads come out of him is because they keep having conflicts and she keeps bumping him. And Mrs. Mugg thinks the pink beads keep coming out of her because he keeps, you know, they keep having problems and he keeps bumping her. But here's the truth. The reason blue beads come out of Mr. Mugg is because that's what's in there. And the reason the pink beads come out of, you writing this down? The reason the pink beads come out of Mrs. Mugg is because that's what's in there. Now this is important. All of us have stuff in us. And you don't know what's in you until you get bumped. And most of us don't get our first real big, hard, you know, gut-wrenching bump until we get into a romantic relationship that we're committed to. And there's something about romance, and there's something about the permanence of I'm committed to you and you're committed to me and we're living together, moving in together, or married together. There's something about that that brings out the best and it brings out the worst. And most people don't know really what's going on in there until they get into a relationship they're committed to and they say, you're the one for me and I'm the one for you. Oh my goodness, what in the world was all of that? And this is why people who make the ultimate commitment to each other end up madder at each other than anyone else on the planet. And he is absolutely sure that the reason the blue beads come out is because she gets on his nerves and she keeps saying that thing and she keeps doing that thing. But the truth is the blue beads come out because they're in there. And she's absolutely sure if he would stop and if he would start and if he would quit and if he would more of and if he would less of and if he would be careful, the pink beads would quit coming out. But the reason they come out is because that's what's in there.
So all of us have stuff in us. Pink beads, blue beads, romantic relationships. They bring it out of us faster than anything else. Something that is sometimes life-giving, good, coming out of us, but also other times where bad things coming out, damaging things. And the scary thing is we don't always know what's in there until, as he said, we get bumped. So we have a tendency to blame the other person, the one who bumped us. And they had no idea that what they said would trigger something like that in you. In fact, I would give them the benefit of the doubt. They fell in love with you. You fell in love with them. Remember, this is the people that you love. If you're married, it's someone that you've made this incredible vow to each other. Why would they attack you? They just had no idea that when you said the trash can is full, that it would trigger some emotion in your mind and remind you of an event where you had this big fight with your mom. I mean, how were they to know that? You know? In fact, what do we do with all that? What do we do with that information? How do we navigate this? Well, it's pretty simple, really, but it's not something that we normally do. And our only hope really is to know what's in us and own it. Claim our baggage. We have to learn to pay attention to what's going on the inside. We've let Paul and Jesus be our relationship counselor, and I really think it's important that we bring in a really smart guy this morning to be our relationship counselor. So I've invited Solomon, the wisest man in the world, his reputation gives us. So if you'll turn with me to Proverbs chapter 4 this morning. He wrote all the Proverbs. And then that's a pretty smart guy, right? And in this particular Proverbs, he thinks this is very important. And again, he's talking generally, but we're going to think about this through a romantic relationship lens. Here's what he says in Proverbs 4:23. He begins with, above all else. Now think about this. This is Solomon, Mr. Wise Guy, right? And he's saying above all else, which means this is the most important it's important, right? I'm trying to lose my thought here. I've lost an hour of sleep and I'm processing a little slower than normal. But it's definitely the blue beads that are having the issues. So he's saying, that this is important. And when Solomon says that this is important, the most important, that's pretty important, right? So here he says, the most important thing, above all else, guard your heart. Now, I've heard different people talk about this passage, and I've heard some people say, guard your heart means don't let anyone in. Your heart is too valuable to let anyone access to. You just don't want to get your heart damaged, so you got to keep it kind of away from other people, right? But when you're thinking about guarding something, think about guards in a prison. They're not just keeping people out, right? Guards do more than that. Prison guards, what do they do most? Well, they do keep some people out, but most of their job is monitoring who is coming in and who's going out, right? That's their primary job. They're paying attention to what they're guarding. They're making sure that they're controlling access to what's being guarded, keeping it valuable. And in the time of Solomon, the heart represented the seat of emotion. It was where all the emotions came from. So when Solomon's saying, I want you to guard your heart, he's saying, pay attention to your emotions. Look at what's coming and going. Maybe even control the monitoring of those coming and goings, right? Pay attention to the condition of your heart. But that's easy to talk about. What does it look like practically? We've been trying to be practical. What does it look like to guard your heart? In fact, when I think about all my relationships, Abby had my yearbooks out because she was been working on yearbook at school, and I started reading through some of the notes in one of my yearbooks, and I ran across a note from one of my girlfriends from high school, and I didn't even remember it was there. It was just kind of interesting, and she talked about our relationship, and the reality is I had some things in me that was coming out that wasn't all that helpful for the relationship. Looking back at it as a freshman boy in high school, you know what I was really good at, though, was monitoring the behavior of her. Right? I don't want to focus in on me. I don't even know how to do that, but I'm really good at watching what you're doing, right? Most of us decide when we get into a relationship, our most important thing is to monitor our partner's behavior. We're really good at it. We really get good at knowing what they do and don't do, what they should do and shouldn't do, and what they say and don't say, and what they should be saying, right? We're really good at the monitoring of them. But when we focus all of our attention on you instead of me, we're actually buying into this idea that if I can just get you to behave a certain way, then you know what? My relationship with you will be good. I'll be happy. Translated, my happiness, what I feel, depends on what he or she does, right? How they behave. I mean, we all want to feel a certain way. We got into the relationship because of the way they made us feel. So this is logical, right? Feelings got us into the relationship. I mean, it certainly wasn't logic. Certainly wasn't common sense that got us into the relationship. We fell in love. We loved the way they made us feel. We loved the security. We loved the feelings that we were experiencing. We loved the emotion that they were creating in us, right? It's just normal for us to want to keep that emotion alive. But the disconnect is when we use monitoring behavior to try to get them to do and to stop and to, do all the things that we think needs to happen in order for me to maintain this feeling. It just doesn't work. I'll show you how to love me. I'll show you what you have to do so that I can experience this feeling. The truth is that your ability to feel, whether it's loved, accepted, respected, cared for, your ability to stay in love has as much to do with the condition of your heart, your pink and blue beads, what's already in there, than the behavior of your significant other. I mean, both are important, but we tend to ignore one of the sides. We tend to ignore our own heart, and we pay all of our attention on them. Now, how do I know that the heart is so important? Well, Solomon says in the next phrase, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. We've looked at this. A few weeks ago, we looked at Matthew 15. Jesus is saying the same thing. What is in there is going to come out, not because of the person you're with, but because it was in you to begin with, right? Pink beads, blue beads. What you've probably already discovered in relationships, if you've been in more than one relationship, is that you get into the love relationship and you end up blaming the other person for whatever you're feeling. And then you discover that when you get into another relationship, you strangely enough, those blue beads keep coming out, right? And you keep blaming the other person for their making you feel the way you feel. And 4 relationships later, blue beads keep coming out. And you thought, man, I've married all these different people, and they all seem to have the same problem. They keep bringing these blue beads out of me. I need to find somebody that won't bring those blue beads out. Right? But it doesn't work that way. Remember, we all have baggage. We all got stuff on the inside. If you've come out of a home that maybe you didn't feel as appreciated as you should have been appreciated, that's going to affect how well you receive the appreciation of your husband or your wife. No matter what he or she does, there may always be a sense of, it's just not enough. And that's your beads. That's on you. This is not just about them. This is about you as well. Your partner's behavior is only part of the equation. And this is a key part. It's the part of the equation that you can't control. You can't control them. And if you're relying on control to stay in love, then good luck. The truth is, if you spend more time monitoring your partner's behavior than you do guarding your heart, you just won't stay in love. Because you'll stay focused only on the problems of the other person instead of on what you need to deal with in your own life. Now, the crazy thing in this whole conversation is that it's so easy to see in other couples, right? I mean, you've seen your friends argue, you've seen friends of yours have fights, and then maybe one of them comes and confides with you what the other person's doing, and you listen to them and you're thinking, yeah, I see what the problem is. I see that your husband, what they did, definitely a 4 or 5 on the scale of bad, right? But the way you're reacting to this, it's a 9 or a 10. So where did the 4 or 5 or 6 extra points come in, right? We see it so easy in other people, but it's so hard for us to see it in ourselves. It's so important for those of us who want to stay in love to pay attention, to do the monitoring of our own selves. And how do we do it? Well, I want to introduce to you an exercise that may help you to begin to pay attention to what's on the inside. There's 3 parts of this. Part 1, you've probably seen it said before, think before you speak. But this exercise is a little bit different. Think about what you feel before you speak. So before you open your mouth, think about what you feel. So imagine you and your spouse, you and your loved one, you have this bump. There's some conflict in your life. And all of a sudden, here comes the volcano, right? That's where I need you to push the pause button, and I want you to think about what you're feeling before you speak. I mean, it sounds easy, right? But what exactly does she make me feel when this happens? What exactly does he make me feel? What specific emotion is being surfaced here? Now, for some of us, this is the hard part. We just got bumped. We got to respond. I just can't. We just feel like we have to respond. I can't be treated like this. Well, if you want to stay in love, trust me, keep your mouth shut and think. Process through this. Think about what's going on the inside. As Solomon says, guard your heart. Think through it. Is this even possible? Lord, help us. Pause and think through this. Step 1, pause and think about what you feel before you speak. Step 2, name what you're feeling. Name what you're feeling. Now, we're still not talking, okay? We're still thinking. In our own minds, we're thinking, now what exactly is the emotion that I'm feeling? Now, that's easier said than done for a lot of us, and guys especially. Let me just say something to the guys. I know how this works for us. When I say, what are you feeling? You're going to say, frustrated. What else do you feel? Frustrated. Okay, well, can you go a little deeper with that? Well, I feel frustrated. Maybe I feel anger too. Is it only frustration and anger that we feel? No, we've got to go a little bit further than that, right? I mean, we feel frustrated. I get that, but we've got to work on our vocabulary a little. Let me give you a few words that you might be able to use, okay? Just thinking through things. Here's a bunch of them. Maybe you felt left out, embarrassed. I know you're mad, but what is it about the mad? Are you embarrassed? Are you unappreciated? Are you feeling unlovable? When you say that to me, it makes me feel unlovable. I feel like a failure. I mean, we're trying to guard our hearts here. We're trying to pay attention to what's going on. Do you feel stupid? Do you feel lonely? Do you feel abandoned? There's just a lot of different words you can use to help this conversation move along. What is it? What is this exact feeling that you're thinking? I'm not just going to say I'm mad. I'm going to think through this a little bit further. We've had this argument before. I don't want to argue anymore. I want to get past this. While it's up, while I'm angry about it, what is it that I'm struggling with? What's the emotion? And then I'm going to name it, right? And then there's the third step. After you've named it, now it's time to actually open your mouth and proclaim it. Say it out loud to your loved one. See, now we're actually getting somewhere. Now you're beginning to discover and pinpoint, really, what's already in there. Things that you're feeling, bringing emotions out of the dark and into the light. And really, when we do that, it removes a lot of the power that comes with our emotions. If we're willing to actually say it out loud that I'm frustrated, but I'm specifically feeling this because of what you just said. I think, when we keep our emotions down in there and we just get mad, that they become powerful. They drive us. when we start saying out loud clearly to each other what's going on, then we actually get to work on it. Bringing them out into the open also allows us to get some insight on maybe where the source is coming from, what it's coming from. When we begin naming things, when we start looking at our beads, we may actually discover that, you know what, this bead, this is a me issue. This is a Brian bead. This really has nothing to do with her. I was just mad because of some other situation that I've been in and the way I was treated back then. And, instead of getting angry at her, maybe I need to apologize to her. I mean, we have some options to go with when we actually start thinking about what we're feeling. And here's what I think we'll discover. Oftentimes, much of, not all of, but much of what the stuff is that we struggle with was not brought into our lives by the relationship that we're in. It has nothing to do with our current husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend, but their words and actions surface it. Bring it out. And when we start sharing those things, we actually get an opportunity for healing. We have an opportunity to begin discerning the difference between what I feel and what they are doing. They're two different things, right? Might not even be connected. It's a powerful exercise. But as long as we keep it a secret, we continue to just drive a deeper and deeper wedge between us, and eventually we'll get to a point where we get to hate you worse than any other person on the planet. So we've got to name it. It's jealousy. I feel jealous about what you just said. I feel left out. And why is this so hard? Well, I think sometimes we like the excuse. I like to be mad at you. I get to blame you for stuff. But that's not a real good exercise if you actually want to stay in love, right? We need to lose the excuse and actually start working on the relationship. Now let me just give you a couple of suggestions as you start having these conversations together. First off, make sure when you start saying things out loud that you don't use words like you always. It's much better to say, I feel this emotion. I mean, we're not trying to get into a bigger fight, right? Here we're actually trying to stay in love. So we just have to not be so pushing against them. I've discovered that whenever you say those things, I just get this feeling. It makes me feel like this. It makes me feel like I'm unappreciated. And for the other party, when you're listening to this, when your loved one starts talking about their feelings, just remember there's no bad feelings. There's just feelings. So when someone that you love says to you, when you do this, it makes me feel like this. That's not a criticism of you, okay? Don't take it personally. It'll feel personal, but it's very important that we not get defensive, that we not be insecure about this. And in fact, if we start getting defensive and insecure, whose beat is that? That's ours, right? We get to claim that one. And when someone opens up to us in that way, do you know what the proper response is? The proper response is, I'm so glad you told me. I'm so glad you told me. It's not, you shouldn't feel that way. It's not, I'm sorry that you feel that way. It's, I'm glad you told me. I'm glad you told me. And then the next part is the most important part. I'm glad you told me. Because where do we go next? We go to fixing the problem. In fact, I think we better work on this because this is the hardest part. Can you guys say this with me? Repeat after me. I'm glad you told me. You have your lips shut? Because healthy people, when they discover that something that they say, something that they do triggers something in their partner that's not positive, you know what healthy people do? they quit doing it. They quit doing it. I mean, doesn't that make sense? They don't say, well, you just have to deal with it. They don't say, well, you should grow up. You need to mature. You just quit doing it. Just quit doing it. If you know there's something in you that you cause in someone else, don't do it. Right? Does that make sense? So let's just wrap this up. If we want to stay in love, start paying attention to your heart. Guard your heart. I know you're going to pay attention to their behavior. I know you're really good at that. But work on this other part. This week, your challenge this week is to start paying attention to what you're feeling, your emotions, okay? Asking the question, what exactly am I feeling? And then I want you to say it out loud. And then look at what you said out loud and start thinking about where it might have come from. And hopefully you'll get to the point where you say, you know what? I think this might not be a marriage problem. Might not be a relationship problem at all. It might be a me problem. Something that I need to find healing in my life. Some hurt. Something that God needs to help me with. God, would you help me heal this hurt in my heart so that I can have a better relationship with my loved one? Because your ability to stay in love has as much to do with the condition of your heart as it does the behavior of your loved ones.